Welcome, friends. My name is Dorina Lazo Gilmore, and I wanted to share with you today a devotional called Diamonds Made by Fire. A few weeks ago, I actually had the opportunity to run in a 10K race here locally in Central California, and it was called the Diamond 10K. And my friend Sunny, she was hosting the race. She actually started a business 10 years ago called Endure, and it is a jewelry and apparel company designed especially for runners. So she has all kinds of neat products, and she wanted to host this celebration, and so she put on this race. And it was geared mostly towards women, although there were some men who also ran in it. And so I got ready to run that race on Sunday morning. I was up at the starting line with some of my friends, and we were excited. And we were excited because of being out there and being able to run, and we were also excited because at the finish line we were going to get something special. Usually you get a medal at the finish line, but this time Sunny was offering a beautiful diamond necklace. And so it was a little different incentive. It was kind of fun. So we took off and we were running. A 10K is about 6.2 miles. And for the first 3 miles, I felt amazing. There were so many friends who were out, who were encouraging, cheering, high-fiving each other. And my pace was a little bit faster than I normally go. So I felt really good. And then I got to mile 4. And at mile 4, there was less shade. We were down in this little cow loop area, so this trail that's dusty, and I began to feel the heat on my back, and the sweat was rolling down, and I was starting to feel a little bit thirsty, which is not a good thing in a race because it means that I didn't have enough water. And I found myself partway through mile 4 at the base of what we fondly call around here Killer Hill. And so Killer Hill, you can imagine, it got its nickname for a reason. It's because it's a very steep hill. In fact, it's probably the biggest hill in Woodward Park where we were running. And so I knew it was going to be a doozy. I've been on Killer Hill before for races and for training, and I knew that I had to put one foot in front of the other and swing my arms and get going. And so I made my way up Killer Hill, probably slower than I normally go just because of the heat. But I made it, and I continued to run and was able to cross that finish line at the hour mark. And I felt so accomplished because the race was much harder and hotter than I had expected it to be, especially for a 10K. But I got in line and I stood up on the stage with the diamond dudes, and they passed out the beautiful diamond necklaces, and they handed us, also we got to have these really fun sparkly donuts and a banana and some water. And so as I was waiting in that line, I was thinking about how this race was called the Diamond 10K. And I did a little research on diamonds actually, and I read in the Smithsonian magazine that the diamonds are formed under extreme heat and pressure. And I thought, well, how appropriate for this race that turned out to be a little harder and a little hotter than we all expected, that it would be for diamonds and for getting this diamond necklace. And so as I saw my friends and other women, as they were coming in, they had a little massage table at the finish line, so I got a massage, and I did a little yoga class. And I was eating my food, drinking my water, and I was watching the women come in, cheering for them. And the day was getting hotter and hotter. And so I saw how these beautiful women of all shapes and sizes, all different ages, were persevering across that finish line. And I thought about how every one of us has a diamond story. Every one of us has something that we've persevered through. And that look of victory as those women crossed the line, it was priceless. And so I was reminded in that race that diamonds are something that God created in the heat. They're something that God created that is beautiful, that comes out of the pressure. And I believe that's a great metaphor for our lives. Today I'm going to share with you a story from the book of Daniel. And just to give you a little context in case you're not familiar with the book of Daniel, it's part of the Old Testament of the Bible. And in this book, a young man, probably a teenager, they think, he was living in a place called Babylon. And he was an Israelite. He was serving the God of Israel, but that was not popular in this place called Babylon, where King Nebuchadnezzar was the king. And King Nebuchadnezzar, he had this decree that everyone in his kingdom had to bow down and worship him, like he was a god. He wanted this glory for himself. And so Daniel and some of his friends, he had 3 friends. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so this story is about his 3 friends, actually, because they found themselves in a bit of trouble. They were in a hot mess because they had decided that they were not going to bow down to the king. And some people noticed and they actually snitched on them. They told on them because they did not like these Jewish boys. And so the king found out, and he ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would be thrown into the fiery furnace because they were not bowing down to worship him. And so I want to read for you from the book of Daniel, chapter 3, what happens, the response of these young men when they hear what Nebuchadnezzar says, that they're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. So this is chapter 3, verses 16 to 18, and it says, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." And so they were making a strong statement, trusting their God. And the king, of course, is filled with fury, and he orders this furnace to be turned up 7 times hotter than usual. And then he sends some of his mightiest men from his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to bind them up so they can't escape. And he orders them to throw these 3 young boys into the furnace. Well, what happens is actually those mighty men who were to usher these young men into the furnace, they actually died because the furnace was so hot. And that's a detail just mentioned in verse 22. And so let's read together what happened. It says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. And he declared to his counselors, 'Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?' And they answered and said to the king, 'True, O king.' And he answered and said, 'But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods.'" That's Daniel chapter 3, verses 24 to 25. They were walking around in the fire, and God had sent an angel to be with them. And so they were in this situation, they were in this hot mess where they needed to be rescued by God, and they trusted him. They fully trusted him, and they needed to be rescued from the fire, literally. They also needed to be rescued from the enemy, who was the king. But they trusted God. And I love how they say, "But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods." And so they trust God that even if they were to perish, even if they were to die in the process of this fire, that God is in control. And that they knew that he was the one and only true God. And their attitude is what inspires me today. And so here's how God responds. You know, I think about it and it's like, well, God could have gone in and he could have just turned down the temperature on that fire. He also could have just wiped out King Nebi. I mean, he was the enemy after all, and I know that God can perform wild miracles, and if you've read your Old Testament, you know that's true and possible. But no, he doesn't wipe out King Nebi. Instead, he sends an angel to be with them in the fire. And so I'm going to read for you from Daniel chapter 3, verses 26 to 28, because this is the response of King Nebi. He recognizes the God of rescue. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of the men. The hair on their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not burned, and no smell of the fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Friend, do you feel like you are in the fire today? Do you feel like I did at the bottom of Killer Hill, looking up and just wondering how in the world you were going to make it through the heat and the pressure? I just want to remind you that you are not alone, that there's another in the fire with you. As that Hillsong worship song says, there's another in the fire. And I want you to know that Jesus Christ, the one and only true God, he suffered and he died and he chose an awful death on the cross because he cares about you and me. And he stood in the fire for 3 days and then he rose again and he walked out of that tomb. And as he walked out of that grave, it was a declaration to all of humanity and history that we might have the opportunity to have freedom and eternal life if we believe in him. And so, friends, I'm going to share with you some encouraging words from the book of 1 Peter, chapter 4, verses 12 through 13. It says, "Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice, inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed." Your suffering, your trials, your disappointments, your challenges today can be used to point others to his glory. And the way that that can happen is by your posture, by your trust, by you believing along with me that God is in the fire with us. We serve a God of rescue. He rescues us. And he doesn't always turn down the heat on the fire. He doesn't always knock out the king, even though that might be our heart's desire. But he is with us. And as it says in 1 Peter chapter 4, we should not be surprised. And you know what? If I'm honest with you, I am surprised every time. Every time. Every time I am having a challenge with one of my children. Every time there is a misunderstanding with a friend. Every time I am having tension with my husband or some other circumstance in my life, I feel surprised. I feel like, why am I going through this? Why is this happening, God? I'm crying out. And I have to remember these words in 1 Peter chapter 4. That the trials will come. That as Christians, we are not exempt from trials. But what we have is we have God's presence. And that he is making diamonds out of us when we are in the fire. And so I want to thank you for being with me today. I'd love to connect with you more personally. You can find me over at DarinaGilmore.com. That's my website. And I'd love for you to sign up for my Glorygram newsletter so we can talk more personally and regularly. Take care, friends.